Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Warlords of Draenor Dungeon Guide. And in this video, we're going to be taking a look at one of the new 5-man dungeons that's been released with Warlords of Draenor, and this is the Grimrail Depot. Now, in total, this dungeon has got 3 bosses, and it can be located in Gorgrond if you'd like to walk there instead of using the dungeon finder. If you'd like to skip to a specific boss, then please do use the annotations that are on screen now, or alternatively, if you'd like to view a written version of this guide, then please do head on over to flaskup.com or click on the link that's in the video description below. The first boss in this dungeon is a 2-for-1 package deal, as you're going to be taking on Railmaster Rocketspark and also Borka the Brute. Now, each of these 2 bosses have their own health pool and their own set of abilities that we're going to go over. It's worth noting that because they do have separate health pools, we find it is easier to kill off Railmaster Rocketspark first and then go for Borka the Brute afterwards, but you can do whichever kind of suits the group that you're in. So first of all, we're going to take a look at Railmaster Rocketspark, and his first ability is called the VX-18B Target Eliminator, which could just be shortened to Missiles of Doom, really. And this will cause him to launch missiles up to 2 players, their target locations, and if people get hit by these missiles, they're going to take a high amount of fire damage, as well as anyone else that's within the blast radius. So simple move out of the danger zone mechanics apply here. When you see the red circle on the ground, simply move away from it. Now throughout the fight, Rocketspark is going to fly up into the air, and he will begin casting a missile barrage, which will cause him to fire a volley of missiles, which inflict a small amount of fire damage to start with, and this is inflicted every 1 second for 20 seconds. Now as he's casting this, he will cast an ability called Locking On, which causes him to lock onto players, increasing the damage he deals by 10% every 1 second until he's interrupted. Now, how do you interrupt him, you ask? Well, this is where Borka the Brute comes into play, as he's got an ability called Mad Dash. Now, this will cause him to charge forward, trampling over anything in his path, and also interrupting spellcasts for 3 seconds. The interrupting bit is what is key here, and when Borka is about to cast Mad Dash and when Rocketspark is flying in the air, you want to kind of position him so that he is facing where Rocketspark is, and then he will charge towards him and interrupt him. It's the tank that needs to do the positioning for this, and not the DPS or the healers, as Borka will be focused on the tank. Now, Rocketspark does have one more ability, and this is called New Plan, which basically means if you kill off Borka the Brute first, Rocketspark will devise a new plan, and he'll just begin launching a volley of missiles at players that deal a small amount of fire damage every 5 seconds. He will also cast his Locking On ability, which causes this damage to be increased significantly every 1 second by 10%. Now Borka the Brute has also got one more ability, and this is called Slam, and this will cause him to inflict a moderate amount of physical damage to everyone that's in the party. And on the heroic mode version of this fight, the Slam ability will also interrupt casting for 3 seconds. So you need to make sure that when Slam's about to go off, you stop casting, or you'll get spell locked for 3 seconds. Now Borka has also got a kind of mini enrage, so if you happen to do kill off Rocketspark first, which is what we do recommend, then Borka will slip into an uncontrolled blood craze, and this will increase both his damage done by 100% and his attack speed by 50%. We found that this damage was a lot easier to manage and control, as it will only be on the tank, whereas if you kill off Borka, Rocket's New Plan ability affects everyone in the party. The second boss you're going to face in this dungeon goes by the name of Nitrogg Thundertower, and this is quite possibly one of the coolest looking bosses, mainly because you're on a moving train and it just looks really good. Now at the start of the fight, you're going to face Nitrogg in a very confined space at one end of the train carriage that you're currently on. And during this time, you're going to have to deal with 2 abilities, the first one going by the name of Blackrock Mortar, which will cause him to target a location and inflict fire damage to anyone who is there. So you simply need to try and move around as much as you can in the small area in order to avoid this damage. And his second ability is called Blackrock Grenade, which will cause him to deal damage to players and also people that are near that targeted player. Again, try and stay spread out if possible, but because of the confined space you're in, it is kind of hard to dodge these 2 abilities. When Nitrogg reaches 60% remaining health, he's going to retreat down the train and get into his assault cannon at the other end. Now, when he's in the assault cannon, you're not able to directly deal damage to him, and instead you're going to have to make use of the black rock mortar shells and the black rock grenades that the waves of adds that are spawning will drop in order to bring down the health of the cannon and then bring Nitrogg back into the fight. Now, while he is in the cannon, he's going to periodically fixate on players and begin to cast an ability called Suppressive Fire, which is going to fixate on a player and deal very high amounts of damage to them if it does hit them. Thankfully, you've got all of these boxes on the train carriage that you can hide behind, and you do need to move behind them and hide if you do get fixated on, otherwise the damage is just going to flat out kill you. Now, as the adds are spawning onto the carriage, you want your tank to pick them up as soon as possible and keep them stacked up so that you can kill them as fast as you can and pick up the black rock grenades and the mortar shells that they drop. Now, this is just literally right clicking on an item that is on the floor, and when you do pick it up, you're going to gain an extra ability button which you can click in order to use them. You can also set up a macro for this button, which I've put in the video description below. You need to use these abilities on the assault cannon in order to deal damage to it and effectively break Nitrogg out of it. On the heroic mode version of this fight, Nitrogg is also going to periodically cast an ability called Slag Blast, which will cause him to set a large portion of the train carriage on fire. Now, when you're looking at the train from a side-on angle, you can see it's roughly split into 3 sections, so the front, the middle and the back. So when one of the sections has been set on fire, you'll be able to move to one of the other 2 in order to not stand in the fire and not take damage. It's going to be easier if you move and stay together as a group so that you know roughly where the fire is going to go next. And you also need to make sure that you move from the fire when it lands as soon as possible, due to the stacking damage that it's going to deal to you if you're standing in it. Once Nitrogg has been broken out of the assault cannon, then you'll go back to fighting him just like you did at the start of the fight, where he's going to have 2 abilities only that you'll have to deal with. At this point, it's just DPS him down, and the rest of the fight is easy. And the third and final boss in this dungeon goes by the name of Skylord Tovra, and as well as fighting Tovra during this encounter, you're also going to have to deal with her Rylak mount bombarding the platform and trying to make your life a misery basically. Now, throughout the fight, Tovra is going to cast an ability called Freezing Snares, which will throw a frost trap onto the ground, which is marked very clearly with a kind of white light coming out of it, so you see where they are being placed, and you basically want to avoid standing into these as they're going to snare you and also anyone that is within 6 yards of you when it does get detonated. Tovra is also going to periodically cast an ability called Spinning Spear, which will cause her to deal damage to random players in the party. Now, this is unavoidable damage, so healers should be aware of the initial damage and also the stun that is going to be dealt to players when they do get hit by the Spinning Spear. There is a chance that someone could get hit by the Spinning Spear, just as her next ability, Diffused Energy, goes off, so you do need to take into account any extra damage people will be taking. Now, moving on to the Diffused Energy, this is an ability that Rylak, her flying mount, is going to constantly bombard the platform with, and this will spawn a pool of lightning on the ground that you should move out of as soon as possible. This is your standard don't stand in the fire mechanic for this encounter. Now, these pools are going to spawn randomly and more frequently as the fight does go on, so you want to make sure you're making the most of any free space that you have on the train. As well as Diffused Energy, Rylak's also going to cast an ability called Thunderous Breath periodically, and this is going to cause damage to everyone in the party. There's no way of avoiding this damage, it's just something that you simply need to heal through. Now finally, on the heroic mode version of this encounter, Tovra is going to periodically cast an ability called Hunter's Mark, which will cause her to throw an explosive spear at the target location of a player. When the spear is thrown, it's going to explode and deal fire damage to anyone that is within 8 yards. So, as you may have guessed, when you get targeted, you'll have a red arrow put above your head, and this is an indication to move away from the rest of your party, so that when the spear explodes, it's only going to deal damage to you and not anyone else, as they'll be out of the 8-yard range. It is ideal to kind of try and stay spread out due to the snares and traps that are going off during this fight, but at the same time you kind of want to stay close together for any form of AoE healing, as there is quite a bit of raid-wide damage going out throughout the encounter. So that's going to do it for this Warlords of Draenor dungeon guide. Hopefully it helps you get through the Grimrail Depot without too many issues. And if you would like to view a written version of this guide, then there is a link available in the video description below, or you can head on over to flaskup.com and just hover over the little dungeon guides tab at the top of the page. Alternatively, if you are interested in any future Warlords of Draenor dungeon or raiding guides that we have to offer, then please do feel free to subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.